The morning sun filters through the lace curtains Maria helped me hang in my Columbus apartment, casting delicate shadows across the pages where I write. Outside, children's laughter echoes from the playground, but I still hear the rain. Not today's gentle spring shower, but the violent deluge of that October night in 1958, when everything I thought I knew about love, family, and survival shattered like glass against stone. My fingers weathered now, but strong traced the faint scars on my wrists. Barely visible after all these years, yet permanent as the memories they represent. They say time heals all wounds, but some wounds transform rather than heal, becoming part of your landscape, like the Ohio River that carved new channels through Milford after each flood. I write this not for sympathy, but for the women who might see themselves in these pages, women who loved too deeply, trusted too completely, and found themselves trapped in the very place that should have been sanctuary. I write for mothers who blamed themselves, for women who stayed silent, for daughters who learned that sometimes the monster doesn't hide under the bed. Sometimes it sits at your dinner table, calls you mom, and knows exactly where you keep your spare key. Milford, Ohio, in the 1940s, was a town where church bells marked time more reliably than clocks, where everyone knew your business before you did, and where the Ohio River served as both lifeline and constant threat. I was Elena Kowalski, then born in 1916, to Polish immigrants who had traded old country uncertainties for the backbreaking certainties of American farm work. My father, Stanisław, possessed hands that could coax life from the most stubborn soil. My mother, Anna, had a voice that could soothe crying babies and sing hymns with equal grace. When the Great Depression arrived, I watched my father's shoulders grow more stooped each season as crop prices plummeted, saw my mother's dresses grow threadbare as she refused to spend money on herself. Those lean years taught me the art of making do, stretching one chicken into 3 meals, darning socks until they were more patch than original fabric. More importantly, they taught me the value of caring for others. When neighbors fell ill, my mother would appear at their door with soup and clean linens. "We take care of our own," she would say in her accented English, and I absorbed that lesson like sunlight, never imagining that one day it would nearly destroy me. I met Robert Thompson at a church social in spring 1936. He was 22, I was 19, and we both understood that love in those days was a luxury you couldn't afford to waste on pretty faces alone. Robert worked at the steel mill steady work that promised security. "You're going to be a nurse," he told me on our third date as we walked along the riverbank where willows dragged their fingers in the muddy current. "I can see it in how you bandaged Mrs. Peterson's cut yesterday. You've got healing hands." "And what makes you so certain?" I challenged, secretly thrilled he'd noticed. "Because you see people, Elena. Really see them. Not everyone has that gift." After we married in St. Stanislaus Catholic Church in 1937, I enrolled in the county hospital's nursing program. The training was rigorous 12-hour shifts, demanding instructors who showed no mercy for weakness, the constant weight of other people's pain and recovery. But Robert had been right about my hands. They seemed to know instinctively how to comfort, heal, ease suffering. Alex came along in 1941, just as the world exploded into war. I remember holding him for the first time, his tiny fist wrapped around my finger with surprising strength, thinking I would do anything to keep him safe from the chaos consuming everything beyond our small town's borders. The war years blurred together long hospital shifts treating broken men, while Robert worked double shifts producing materials for tanks and ships. We barely saw each other except in passing, exhausted kisses in doorways, brief conversations over hurried meals, hands touching across the space between our beds when we were both too tired for more than acknowledgement. But Alex thrived, a beautiful child with dark curls and serious eyes, quick to laugh, but equally quick to disappear into his imagination. I'd find him in the backyard, conducting elaborate conversations with invisible friends, arranging toy soldiers in complex formations he'd seen in newsreels at the Milford Theater. "He's got your eyes," Robert would say, watching our son with pride mixed with concern I didn't understand then. But there's something else there, something deeper. He's just thoughtful. I'd reply defensive the way mothers always are when their children are assessed by others, even loving fathers. Looking back, I wonder if Robert saw what I was too blinded by love to recognize. Or perhaps Alex saved his darker thoughts for later, when the world had taken enough from him to justify their existence. Robert died on a Tuesday morning in March 1953, crushed beneath machinery that should have been replaced years earlier, but wasn't because mill owners valued profit over lives. The insurance settlement was insultingly small enough to keep the house for a few more years, not enough to maintain the comfortable middle-class existence we'd built so carefully. I threw myself into work with desperation, knowing that stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant drowning. By 1955, I'd been promoted to head nurse at Milford General Hospital, a position commanding respect, but demanding everything I had to give. 12-hour shifts stretched to 14, then 16, as I took on extra duties to supplement our income. Alex, 12, when his father died, absorbed the blow with stoicism that both impressed and worried me. He didn't cry at the funeral, didn't rage or throw tantrums. Instead, he became quieter, more watchful, as if studying the world and finding it wanting. Alex seems to be adjusting well, his teacher, Mrs. Morrison, told me during a parent conference 6 months after Robert's death. She was a kind woman with silver hair and gentle eyes who taught 3 generations of Milford children. His grades are excellent, his behavior exemplary, but Elena, he doesn't play with other children much anymore. He spends recess alone reading or just watching. He's always been mature for his age. I said, the defensive mother again. He's dealing with grief in his own way. But privately, I worried. At home, Alex had become my partner in survival, rather than my child. He took on chores without being asked, helped with grocery shopping, even learned to cook simple meals. When I came home exhausted from particularly difficult shifts, Alex would have dinner waiting and homework finished. "You don't need to take care of me, sweetheart," I told him one evening, finding him washing dishes, his small frame stretched to reach the sink properly. "Someone has to," he replied without looking at me. "Dad's not here to do it anymore." The words hit like a physical blow. In my grief and financial panic, I'd allowed my 12-year-old son to assume responsibilities that should have remained mine. I knelt beside him, turning him to face me. "Alex, listen to me. You're the child. I'm the parent. It's my job to take care of you, not the other way around." He looked at me with eyes that seemed far too old for his face. "But you're always tired, Mom, and sad. I can help make it better." That night, I lay awake wondering if I was failing him in ways I couldn't comprehend. The truth was, his help had become essential to our functioning. Without his contributions, I might have collapsed under the weight of single parenthood and financial stress. But in accepting his help, had I stolen something crucial from his childhood? The changes in Alex became more pronounced as he entered high school. He'd grown tall and lean, inheriting Robert's sharp features and my stubborn chin. But there was new hardness around his eyes, a way of looking at people as if calculating their worth and finding most wanting. His grades remained excellent, but teacher reports began to concern me. "Alex is disrespectful," came one note home. "He challenges authority in ways that seem designed to provoke rather than learn." Another teacher wrote, "Alex appears to have little empathy for his classmates. When Jimmy Peterson broke his arm during recess, Alex seemed more interested in the mechanics of the injury than in Jimmy's pain." I addressed these concerns directly sitting Alex down at our kitchen table one evening, after a particularly troubling report about him mocking a classmate who'd stuttered during an oral presentation. "What's happening at school, Alex? These reports aren't like you?" He shrugged, a gesture that had become his default response to my questions. "People are stupid, Mom. They say stupid things, do stupid things. Why should I pretend otherwise?" Because kindness matters. Because how we treat others defines who we are as people. His laugh was sharp, bitter. "Did kindness matter when Dad got crushed by that machine? Did it matter when they gave us that pathetic insurance check? Did it matter when Mrs. Henderson crossed the street to avoid talking to us at the grocery store because she didn't want to deal with the poor widow and her boy? His questions struck deep, revealing cynicism that chilled me. But they also revealed something else he'd been paying attention to: every slight, every moment of social rejection we'd experienced since Robert's death. In my grief, I'd missed how those experiences were shaping his view of the world. Life isn't fair, Alex, but that doesn't mean we have the right to be cruel. Doesn't it? His smile was sharp, humorless. Seems to me that cruel people get ahead while good people get crushed by factory equipment. I should have recognized that conversation as a warning sign, should have sought help for both of us. Instead, I convinced myself his anger was part of normal grieving, that time and love would heal the wounds life had inflicted on my son. It was around this time that Alex began spending time with Jake Harlan and his crowd. Jake was 19, a high school dropout whose father drank away his wages and beat his family with systematic regularity. The boy, though, at 19, he was hardly a boy, carried his damage like a badge of honor, attracting followers through charisma and barely contained violence. I don't like your new friends, I told Alex after Jake and several others had spent an evening in our living room filling it with cigarette smoke and crude language. They're real, Mom. They don't pretend the world is something it's not. What's that supposed to mean? It means they don't lie to themselves about people being basically good. They understand that everyone's out for themselves and they act accordingly. That's a terrible way to see the world, Alex. It's an honest way to see the world. The difference is, I'm not afraid of honesty anymore. The rain began before dawn that June morning in 1958, starting as gentle patter against windows that gradually intensified into the kind of deluge that turns familiar streets into rushing rivers. I was working a double shift at the hospital. We were short-staffed due to summer flu outbreak, and by the time my replacement arrived at 7 p.m., the storm had transformed Milford's roads into treacherous channels of mud and standing water. I should have stayed at the hospital overnight, should have listened to Dr. Simmons when he offered me a bed in staff quarters. The roads are dangerous, Elena, he'd said, glancing out at sheets of rain visible through lobby windows. That old Ford of yours wasn't built for weather like this. But Alex was home alone, and despite our growing tensions, I still felt the tug of maternal duty. He was 17, certainly old enough to take care of himself for a night, but the storm was fierce enough to knock out power lines, and I knew he'd worry if I didn't come home as expected. The drive home was a nightmare of limited visibility and hydroplaning wheels. Twice, I had to pull over when rain became so heavy that my windshield wipers were useless. Other cars crawled along at walking pace, their headlights barely penetrating the wall of water that seemed to fall from the sky in solid sheets. I was 3 miles from home, navigating the sharp curve where Mill Creek Road intersected with the main highway, when I saw the headlights bearing down on me. The truck was moving too fast for conditions, its driver either drunk or stupid or both. I yanked the steering wheel hard to the right, but the Ford's tires found no purchase on water-slick asphalt. The impact was a symphony of destruction, the grinding shriek of metal against metal, the explosive percussion of shattering glass, the sudden shocking silence that follows catastrophe. I remember thinking with perfect clarity that this was how Robert must have felt in the split second before the machinery fell. The recognition of disaster, the helpless knowledge that there was nothing to be done but endure whatever came next. When I regained consciousness in Milford General Hospital, Dr. Simmons was standing beside my bed, his kind face creased with professional concern and personal grief. He'd been treating patients in our small town for over 30 years, had delivered. Alex had held my hand while I signed Robert's death certificate. Now, he had to deliver news that would reshape my life just as completely. Elena, you've been unconscious for 18 hours, he began gently. You have a concussion, several broken ribs, and extensive bruising. But the most serious injury, I already knew. I'd tried to move my legs as soon as I woke up, felt nothing below my waist, except a strange, floating sensation, as if the lower half of my body belonged to someone else. The damage to your spinal cord is severe, Dr. Simmons continued. I'm sorry, Elena. The paralysis appears to be permanent. Permanent. Such a final word, carrying the weight of all the things I would never do again. Walk through hospital corridors, stand at patients' bedsides, climb stairs to Alex's room, dance at his wedding chase, grandchildren through my backyard. In an instant, my identity as Elena, the capable nurse Elena, the independent woman Elena, who took care of everyone else, had been stripped away. Alex has been here constantly, Dr. Simmons said, perhaps trying to offer comfort. He's barely left your side except when we forced him to go home and shower. He's been very worried about you. As if summoned by his name, Alex appeared in the doorway, his dark hair disheveled, his clothes rumpled from sleeping in hospital chairs. For a moment, seeing him there, I felt a rush of old maternal love, my boy, my baby, standing vigil over his injured mother. Mom. His voice cracked slightly, and he crossed the room to take my hand. How are you feeling? I've been better, I managed, trying to smile. But I'm going to be fine, sweetheart. Different, but fine. He squeezed my fingers, and for that moment, the distance that had grown between us seemed to collapse. I'm going to take care of you, Mom. I promise. Whatever you need, I'll be there. Looking back, I wonder if there was already something calculated in his concern, if even then he was beginning to see my vulnerability as opportunity rather than tragedy. But in that hospital room, surrounded by the antiseptic smell of disinfectant and the steady beep of monitoring equipment, I heard only love in his voice. The transition home 3 weeks later was more difficult than I'd anticipated. The house that had been my sanctuary for 20 years suddenly felt like an obstacle course designed by someone with a cruel sense of humor. Door frames were too narrow for my wheelchair, the bathroom was completely inaccessible, and the stairs to the second floor might as well have been Mount Everest. Alex threw himself into the task of adaptation with energy that both grateful and unsettled me. He installed a makeshift ramp over the front steps, moved my bedroom downstairs to what had previously been Robert's study, and rigged a system of pulleys and ropes that allowed me to perform basic tasks like reaching items on high shelves. But there was something methodical, almost clinical about his caretaking that troubled me. He approached my needs like mathematical problems to be solved rather than expressions of love to be offered. When I thanked him for his efforts, he would nod and say, "Just being practical, Mom. You don't have to do all this alone," I told him one afternoon as he measured door frames for wider access. "We could ask for help from the church or maybe hire someone part-time." His response was swift and sharp. "We don't need outsiders interfering in our business." "It wouldn't be interfering, Alex. It would be helping." "Same thing," he said, not looking up from his measuring tape. "People help when they want something or when they want to feel superior. Either way, they end up thinking they own a piece of you." I should have pushed back against this cynical worldview, should have insisted that community support was a blessing rather than burden. Instead, I allowed myself to be convinced by his logic, partly because accepting help would have required admitting just how helpless I'd become, and partly because there was something seductive about the idea that Alex and I could handle this crisis together. The first signs of trouble were subtle money missing from my purse, mysterious phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, visitors at odd hours who disappeared quickly when I asked Alex who they were. When I confronted him about these inconsistencies, he had ready explanations. He'd borrowed money for school supplies and forgotten to mention it. The phone calls were from classmates about homework assignments. The visitors were friends stopping by briefly to check on our situation. I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, because the alternative that my son was lying to me during the most vulnerable period of my life was too terrifying to contemplate. The night it all began, Alex had seemed particularly tense during dinner, picking at his food and responding to my attempts at conversation with distracted monosyllables. When I asked if something was wrong at school, he'd snapped, "Everything's fine, Mom. Stop interrogating me." "I'm not interrogating you, Alex. I'm trying to have a conversation with my son." "Your son who's given up his senior year to take care of you. Your son who has no friends anymore because he can't go out and can't bring anyone here because you need constant supervision. That son, his words stung because they contained truth. Alex had sacrificed many normal teenage experiences to care for me, and I felt the weight of that guilt every day. But there was something cruel in the way he delivered this truth, as if he wanted me to feel bad about my dependence on him. "I never asked you to give up your life for me," I said quietly. "You didn't have to ask. What choice did I have?" Before I could respond, he'd left the table and disappeared upstairs. I sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the storm build outside and wondering how we'd reached this point where conversations felt like battles and love felt like obligation. Around 8 o'clock that evening, as the storm reached peak fury, I heard voices in the front yard, young male voices laughing and shouting over the wind. From my position in the living room, I could see headlights cutting through rain, could make out silhouettes of several figures moving toward our front door. Alex bounded down the stairs with energy I hadn't seen from him in weeks. "Some friends are coming over," he announced casually, as if this was something we'd previously discussed. "In this storm, Alex, it's dangerous to be driving in weather like this. They made it here safe. Don't worry about it." The front door burst open before I could protest further, and Jake Harlan strode in like he owned the place, followed by 9 other young men, whose faces I recognized from around town, but whose names I didn't know. They were all soaked from rain, their hair plastered to their heads, their clothes dripping onto my hardwood floors. "Mrs. Thompson." Jake's voice boomed with false cheer as he spotted me in my wheelchair. "Look at you, still looking beautiful even after your accident. Alex told us you could use some cheering up." They filed into my living room, bringing with them the smell of wet clothes, cigarettes, and something else, something sharp and chemical that I couldn't immediately identify. Several carried paper bags that clinked with the sound of glass bottles, and within minutes they'd transformed my quiet home into what felt like a fraternity house party. "This is very thoughtful." I managed trying to maintain some semblance of maternal authority, but it's quite late, and with the storm— "Ah, come on, Mrs. T," said a thin boy with nervous eyes who couldn't have been more than 16. I would later learn his name was Eddie, and that he would be the one whose carelessness would ultimately save my life. "We just want to celebrate with Alex. He's been taking such good care of you, he deserves to have some fun." The logic was twisted but effective. How could I object to my son having friends over without seeming selfish and controlling? How could I deny him this small pleasure when he'd given up so much to care for me? As the evening progressed, the gathering grew louder and more chaotic. Beer bottles appeared, passed from hand to hand, with casual disregard for the fact that most of these boys were underage. Cigarettes were lit and smoked freely, filling my living room with a haze that made my eyes water. When someone produced a joint and began passing it around the circle, I finally found my voice. "That's enough," I said, trying to project authority from my wheelchair. "I won't have illegal drugs in my house." Jake looked at me with amusement, as if I'd said something quaint and outdated. "Relax, Mrs. Thompson. A little reefer never hurt anyone. Hell, it might even help you with that paralysis. I heard it's good for pain." The casual cruelty of his reference to my condition hit me like a physical blow. Around the circle, several boys snickered, and I saw Alex watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, part embarrassment, part defiance, part something darker. "Alex," I said, appealing directly to my son, "please ask your friends to leave. This has gone too far." For a moment, his face softened, and I thought I saw a flash of the boy who had once sought my approval above all else. But then, Jake spoke up. "Come on, Alex. Don't let Mommy spoil the party. You're 18 in 2 months' time to start acting like a man instead of a mama's boy." The change in Alex's expression was instantaneous and chilling. The softness vanished, replaced by hardness that made him look like a stranger. "You're right," he said, not looking at me. "I'm tired of being controlled." The word "controlled" hung in the air between us like an accusation. In my efforts to protect him, to guide him, to maintain some semblance of family structure after Robert's death, had I become the enemy in Alex's mind? I don't control you, Alex, I said quietly. I'm trying to keep you safe. Safe from what? From having friends? From having fun? From having any kind of normal teenage experience? Safe from making choices that could ruin your future? Jake laughed, a sound like breaking glass. His future, lady. His future is taking care of a crippled mother for the rest of his life. Let the boy live a little before that reality sets in. The word crippled struck me with the force of a slap. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I was determined not to cry in front of these boys who seemed to feed on vulnerability, like sharks scenting blood in water. Alex, please, I whispered, making one final appeal to whatever remained of our bond. This isn't you. This isn't who you are. He looked at me then with eyes that held no warmth, no recognition of our shared history, no acknowledgement of the love that had sustained us both through Robert's death and my accident. How do you know who I am? Mom, you've been so busy trying to make me into who you want me to be. Maybe you never bothered to find out who I really am. With that, he crossed to my wheelchair and began pushing me toward the bedroom that had been created for me on the ground floor. You look tired, he said, his voice taking on false solicitude that was somehow more frightening than open hostility. Why don't you get some rest? We'll try to keep it down. I gripped the wheels of my chair, trying to resist, but my upper body strength was no match for his. Alex, don't do this. Whatever you're thinking, whatever Jake has convinced you to do, it's not too late to stop. But he continued pushing me into the bedroom, and as the other boys filed in behind us, I understood with horrible clarity that my son had made his choice, and I was about to pay the price for every decision I'd made as his mother, every boundary I'd set, every moment when love had looked like control in his resentful eyes. The door closed behind us with a soft click that sounded like a death knell. What happened in that room cannot be fully captured in words, but it must be told because silence protects perpetrators while destroying survivors. The violation was horrific enough, but the deeper wound was watching my son, the child who had once brought me dandelions and called them roses, stand by and encourage others to hurt me in ways that no human being should ever endure. Jake was the ringleader, directing the others with casual authority of someone accustomed to orchestrating cruelty. Alex says his mommy needs to learn who's really in charge around here, he announced to the group as they surrounded my wheelchair. I think that's a lesson worth teaching. Throughout the assault, Alex remained present, not participating directly, but orchestrating, encouraging, directing traffic, like some demonic master of ceremonies. When I begged him to stop them, when I called his name with all the love I'd ever felt for him in my voice, he would smile, a cold, calculated expression that bore no resemblance to the warm grins he'd given me as a child. This is what happens when you try to control people. Mom, he said during a brief pause in the assault. This is what happens when you think you know better than everyone else. When it was finally over, they left me broken and bleeding on the bed, dumped like garbage, rather than tucked in like the invalid I'd become. As they filed out of the room, several patted Alex on the back, as if congratulating him for a job well done. Jake paused in the doorway, looking back at me with satisfaction. Thanks for the hospitality, Mrs. Thompson. We'll have to do this again sometime. Alex was the last to leave, and for a moment I thought, hoped, prayed that he might show some sign of remorse. Instead, he looked at me with clinical detachment, as if evaluating the success of an experiment. I'd keep quiet about this if I were you, he said conversationally. Who's going to believe that a devoted son would do such a thing to his disabled mother? And even if they did believe you, what kind of life would you have after everyone in town knew what happened here tonight? With that, he locked the bedroom door from the outside, trapping me with my pain and the dawning realization that this was not an isolated incident born of teenage rebellion and peer pressure. This was planned, calculated, the beginning of something rather than the end. The assaults didn't happen every night, which was perhaps the most diabolical aspect of Alex's strategy. If the abuse had been constant, I might have found courage born of desperation to risk everything on an escape attempt. But the unpredictability, sometimes a week would pass in relative peace. Sometimes Jake and his crew would appear 3 nights in a row, kept me in a state of constant anxiety. Between physical attacks, Alex deployed more subtle forms of psychological warfare, designed to erode my sense of reality and self-worth. He would rearrange items in my room, then claim I'd moved them myself and forgotten. He would hide my medications, causing me to experience withdrawal symptoms, then express concern about my confusion and memory problems. "Mom, you took your pills this morning?" he'd say with perfect sincerity when I complained about the missing medication. "Don't you remember we talked about how important it is for you to stay on schedule?" Food became another weapon. Some days, Alex would bring me elaborate meals playing the role of devoted caretaker to perfection. Other days, he would forget to feed me entirely, leaving me weak and dizzy from hunger. When I complained, he would look hurt and confused. "But I brought you lunch just a few hours ago, Mom. Don't you remember? Maybe we should talk to Dr. Simmons about these memory issues." Sleep deprivation was another favorite tactic. Alex would position a radio outside my bedroom and play it at high volume throughout the night, claiming he couldn't hear it from upstairs and didn't understand why I was complaining about noise that didn't exist. The isolation was perhaps the most effective element of his campaign. Our house, already removed from the center of town, became a prison. Alex controlled all contact with the outside world, answering the phone, accepting deliveries, dealing with any visitors who might stop by. Mrs. Ellis, our neighbor to the right, did attempt to check on me several times during those awful months. I could hear her voice through the front door asking Alex how I was managing, offering to help with household tasks. Alex's responses were masterful performances of filial devotion. "That's so kind of you, Mrs. Ellis. But Mom is really struggling with depression right now. The doctor says the best thing for her is quiet and routine. I'm handling everything she needs." "Oh, the poor dear. If there's anything I can do?" "Just your prayers, Mrs. Ellis. It's been really hard on both of us, but we're managing. You know how proud Mom is? She doesn't like people seeing her this way." Of course. You're such a good boy, Alex. Your mother is lucky to have you." From my bedroom, I would pound on the walls trying to attract Mrs. Ellis's attention, but Alex had strategically positioned my room at the back of the house where sounds wouldn't carry to the front porch. And even if she had heard me, what would she have made of muffled banging sounds? A disabled woman accidentally knocking things over, most likely. One afternoon in late July, I managed to write a desperate note on a scrap of paper. "Please help me. I am being hurt. Call police." When I heard Mrs. Ellis's voice at the front door, I crawled to my bedroom window and attempted to signal her attention. Mrs. Ellis noticed my frantic waving and approached the window. "Elena, dear, are you all right? You look upset." I pressed the note against the glass, tapping urgently to get her to read it, but before she could fully process what she was seeing, Alex appeared beside her. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ellis. Mom gets confused sometimes. The accident affected her more than we initially thought." His voice carried just the right note of embarrassed concern. "She sometimes thinks she's in danger when she's perfectly safe." Mrs. Ellis's face filled with sympathy. "Oh, you poor thing. Brain injuries can be so difficult. My own brother had similar problems after his stroke paranoid delusions, thinking people were trying to hurt him." "Exactly," Alex said gently, guiding her away from the window. "The doctor says it's best not to encourage these episodes. We're hoping it will improve with time." I watched Mrs. Ellis walk away, my last hope for outside intervention disappearing with her retreating figure. When Alex returned to my room, his mask of concern dropped entirely. "That was very foolish, Mom. If you try something like that again, I'll have to take more drastic measures to keep you safe." "Oh, what more can you do to me?" I whispered. His smile was chilling. "There's always more, Mom. There's always more." It was Eddie's carelessness that finally revealed the true scope of Alex's betrayal. On a humid evening in late August, when the air hung thick with the promise of another storm, Jake and 3 others arrived for what had become their regular entertainment. But this time, Jake was agitated, arguing with Alex in hushed tones before they entered my room. "I don't care about your timeline," Jake was saying as they pushed through my bedroom door. "My supplier wants his money now, and you're going to help me get it." "Just stick to the plan," Alex replied, his voice carrying authority I'd never heard before. "Everything will work out if you just be patient." "Huh. Patient." Jake laughed harshly. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one who's going to get his legs broken if this doesn't work out." Then maybe you should have thought about that before you got in so deep with Corelli's people," Alex said coldly. "We all have our problems, Jake. The difference is, I have a solution." During a brief pause in the assault, as Jake and the others stepped out to smoke cigarettes, Eddie, the nervous 16-year-old, who always looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, dropped a crumpled piece of paper from his jacket pocket. In the dim light, he didn't notice it fall behind my bedside table. After they left, after Alex had performed his usual post-assault check to ensure I was sufficiently broken and compliant, after the house had settled into its deceptive peace, I managed to retrieve that scrap of paper with a coat hanger I'd hidden beneath my mattress. What I found written in Alex's careful handwriting shattered whatever remained of my illusions about his motivations. Timeline updated. Insurance policy investigation period, typically 6 months. For accidental death, longer for suicide. Need to establish pattern of mental instability first. Continue with documented depression symptoms. Physical deterioration on schedule. Jaya's impatience becoming problem, but manageable. Target date now, October-November, depending on seasonal factors. River levels, storm patterns. Make sure appears natural, accidental. I read the note 3 times before its full meaning penetrated my consciousness. Alex wasn't torturing me out of resentment, or because Jake was forcing him to cooperate. He was methodically destroying me as part of a calculated plan to murder me for my life insurance policy, Robert's insurance policy. The one benefit that had emerged from his terrible death, the modest sum I'd earmarked for Alex's college education, had become the motive for my son to orchestrate my destruction. Every assault, every humiliation, every psychological manipulation had been designed not just to punish me, but to establish a documented pattern of mental decline that would make my eventual death appear to be suicide. The timeline mentioned in the note explained the periods of relative peace between attacks. Alex was pacing the abuse to create maximum psychological damage while avoiding the kind of physical evidence that might raise questions during an insurance investigation. These seasonal factors referred to the Ohio River's tendency to flood during autumn storms, providing natural cover for what would appear to be an accidental drowning of a mentally unstable, disabled woman who had wandered outside during a moment of confusion. I lay in that bed holding the note with trembling hands and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The maternal love that had survived every assault, every betrayal, every moment of calculated cruelty, finally began to transform into something harder and more practical. The survival instinct of a woman who had finally understood that she was fighting for her life. For months, I had clung to hope that some remnant of the son I'd raised still existed beneath the monster he'd become. I had endured unspeakable horrors, partly because I couldn't fully accept that the boy who had once brought me dandelions and fallen asleep in my arms during thunderstorms was truly capable of planning my murder. But the note eliminated any possibility of denial. Alex hadn't been corrupted by Jake's influence or driven to temporary madness by grief and resentment. He had made a deliberate, calculated decision to trade my life for money, and everything that had happened since my accident had been orchestrated to serve that goal. The realization brought clarity along with devastation. If Alex was planning to kill me in the next few months, I had a narrow window of time to save myself. And if I was going to survive, I could no longer afford the luxury of hoping for his redemption. Over the next several weeks, I began to plan my survival with the same methodical care that Alex had used to plan my destruction. I started by secretly exercising my arms and upper body during the long hours when Alex was at school or out with his friends. Using the resistance of my wheelchair and whatever objects I could reach, I slowly began to rebuild strength that months of malnutrition and abuse had stolen from me. I also began to pay closer attention to patterns when the attacks were most likely to occur, which accomplices seemed more reluctant than others, what times of day Alex was most distracted. I memorized every detail I could about the assaults, the participants, and Alex's behavior, preparing for the testimony I prayed I would someday be able to give. Most importantly, I began to think about how to get help. My previous attempts had failed because Alex controlled my environment so completely. But there had to be a way to reach the outside world some moment when his guard was down. The opportunity came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in early September. Alex had gone to the high school to discuss his graduation requirements with his counselor, an appointment I knew would take at least an hour because he'd complained about how thorough Mrs. Peterson could be. As soon as I heard his car pull out of the driveway, I began the painful process of transferring myself from my wheelchair to the floor. The phone was mounted on the kitchen wall, just high enough that I couldn't reach it from my chair, but possibly accessible if I could pull myself up using the kitchen counter. The journey from my bedroom to the kitchen was agonizing. Pulling myself along the floor with just my arms stopping frequently to rest, I must have looked like some wounded animal crawling toward uncertain salvation. But desperation gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. When I finally reached the kitchen, I discovered that Alex had deliberately damaged the phone cord, cutting it nearly through so that it would appear to be working, but wouldn't actually connect. The sight of those precisely severed wires was almost as crushing as discovering the insurance note, another piece of evidence of how thoroughly he had planned my isolation. But as I examined the damage more closely, I realized that the cut wasn't complete. A few thin copper wires still remained connected. If I could somehow splice them back together, I might be able to make at least one call before the connection failed entirely. Using a kitchen knife and electrical tape I found in the utility drawer, I performed the most important repair work of my life. My hands shook with nervousness and urgency, knowing that Alex could return at any moment, but somehow I managed to create a fragile connection. The dial tone when it finally came was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. There was only one person I could call, only one person who knew me well enough to believe what I was about to tell her, despite the years of silence that had stretched between us, my sister Maria. Maria and I hadn't spoken in over 3 years, not since a bitter argument about our parents' estate had driven a wedge between us that seemed insurmountable. But she was also the only person who knew me well enough to recognize the difference between Elena in crisis and Elena having a breakdown. The phone rang 4 times before her familiar voice answered. "Hello? Maria, it's Elena. I need help. I'm in danger." There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was cautious, concerned. "Elena, what's wrong? You sound terrible." "Maria, please listen to me carefully. I don't have much time, and I need you to believe what I'm about to tell you, no matter how impossible it sounds." I told her everything: the assaults, the psychological torture, Alex's insurance murder plan, my complete isolation from the outside world. I spoke quickly, knowing that my makeshift phone repair could fail at any moment, trying to pack months of horror into a few desperate minutes. When I finished, the silence on the other end stretched so long that I thought the connection had been lost. "Maria, are you there? I'm here." Her voice was shaken, uncertain. "Elena, what you're describing? It's so extreme. Are you sure you're not? I mean, since the accident, have you been taking any medication that might—" "I'm not having delusions, Maria. I'm not imagining this. Alex is planning to kill me for Robert's insurance money, and if you don't help me, he's going to succeed." I heard the sound of Alex's car in the driveway, the slam of the car door. Panic flooded through me. "He's back. Maria, I have to go. Please, please call the police. Tell them to check on me. Tell them I'm in danger." "Elena, wait." I hung up the phone and began the agonizing crawl back to my bedroom, praying that I could make it before Alex discovered what I'd done. Behind me, I could hear him entering the house, calling out his usual greeting. "I'm home, Mom. How are you feeling?" Sheriff Tom Riley arrived at our house on a gray Thursday afternoon, 2 days after my desperate call to Maria. I heard his patrol car pull into our driveway and felt a surge of hope so intense it was almost painful. Finally, someone with authority was going to investigate, was going to see through Alex's facade and recognize what was really happening. From my bedroom window, I could see Sheriff Riley approaching the front door, a man in his mid-50s with a weathered face and the kind of walk that suggested he'd dealt with every variety of human trouble our small town could produce. Alex met him at the door with perfect composure. "Good afternoon, Sheriff Riley. What can I do for you?" "Hello, Alex. I received a call about your mother. Someone's concerned about her welfare. Mind if I come in and speak with her?" Of course not, but I should warn you she's been having some difficulties since the accident. Depression, confusion, sometimes she imagines things that didn't happen. The doctor says it's not uncommon with brain trauma." They spoke in the living room first, their voices carrying clearly to my bedroom. I could hear Alex painting a picture of devoted caretaking of a son, sacrificing his youth to care for his disabled, mentally unstable mother. "It's been really hard, Sheriff. Some days she doesn't recognize me, doesn't remember conversations we had just hours before. Yesterday she insisted that strangers had been in the house, people I'd never seen before. I think the isolation is making it worse." "That must be very difficult for you, son. You're handling a lot of responsibility for someone your age." "I love her, Sheriff. She's all the family I have left. I'll do whatever it takes to take care of her." When they finally came to my bedroom, Sheriff Riley's demeanor was already sympathetic to Alex, already primed to see me as a confused, potentially delusional woman, rather than a victim seeking help. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson. I'm Sheriff Riley. Your sister Maria asked me to check on you. She seemed worried about you." I gripped the arms of my wheelchair, trying to project as much clarity and rationality as possible. "Sheriff, thank God you're here. I need to tell you about what's been happening. My son and his friends have been—" "Now, Mom!" Alex interrupted gently, placing a hand on my shoulder in what would appear to be a comforting gesture, but felt like a warning. "We talked about this. You've been having some confused episodes lately." "I'm not confused." I turned to Sheriff Riley, desperation making my voice sharp. "Sheriff, my son has been allowing his friends to assault me. Jake Harlan, Eddie Morrison, Sam Garrett, and others. They've been coming here at night, and Alex has been—" "Mrs. Thompson," Sheriff Riley said carefully, "Jake Harlan has been in the county jail for the past 2 weeks. Picked him up for theft and assault. There's no way he could have been here recently." The words hit me like a physical blow. I knew Jake had been here just 3 nights ago. I could still feel the bruises from that encounter. But if he'd been in jail— "Sheriff, I need to tell you about the insurance policy. Alex is planning to—" "Mom, please?" Alex's voice carried exactly the right note of embarrassed concern. "You're getting confused again. There haven't been any visitors. It's just been the 2 of us, and I've been taking good care of you." I looked desperately between Alex and Sheriff Riley, seeing the doubt in the sheriff's eyes, the way he was already beginning to categorize me as another sad case of accident-related mental decline. "Sheriff, please. I'm not delusional. Check my body, you'll see the evidence of what they've done to me." But even as I said it, I realized how impossible that evidence would be to evaluate. The bruises and injuries from months of assault had faded and been replaced so many times that there was no clear forensic trail. And what jury would believe that a devoted son would orchestrate such horror? Sheriff Riley spent another 10 minutes with us, asking gentle questions that Alex answered with perfect composure. He examined my medications, my living conditions, my general health, and found everything exactly as it should be for a disabled woman being cared for by a loving son. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand that your situation is difficult," he said finally. "Adjusting to disability can be very challenging, and sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we're struggling. But it seems to me that Alex is doing everything he can to take care of you. Sheriff, please, I'll be in touch with your sister to let her know that you're safe and well cared for." And Alex, if you ever need help dealing with your mother's condition, don't hesitate to call. There are resources available. After Sheriff Riley left, Alex returned to my bedroom with an expression I'd never seen before. Not the calculated coldness he'd worn during the assaults, not the false concern he displayed for outsiders, but something that looked almost like pity. That was very foolish, Mom. But I understand why you did it. Desperation makes people do stupid things. Alex, please. If there's any part of you that remembers being my son, that remembers loving me, please stop this. It's not too late to... To what? To pretend this never happened? To go back to the way things were? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. There's no going back, Mom. There never was. Why are you doing this to me? For a moment, his mask slipped completely, and I saw something raw and painful in his expression. Years of accumulated resentment finally finding voice. Because I can. Because you're weak and helpless, and you can't stop me. Because I spent 17 years being controlled by you being told what to do and how to feel and who to be, and now it's my turn to control someone else. I never tried to control you, Alex. I tried to love you, to guide you. You tried to make me into Dad. The words exploded out of him with years of suppressed fury. Every day, every conversation, every decision you wanted me to be him. But I'm not him, Mom. I'm not the good man who died in that factory. I'm something else entirely, and you made me this way. That's not true. Isn't it you think I don't remember how disappointed you were every time I didn't live up to your precious memory of him? You think I don't know that you blamed me for not being able to replace him? Well, congratulations, Mom. You got exactly what you deserved, a son who's nothing like the man you actually wanted. With that, he left the room, locking the door behind him. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I found myself crying not from pain or fear, but from grief for the little boy who had once existed, who had somehow twisted his childhood hurts into this monstrous campaign of revenge. October came early that year, bringing with it the kind of weather that made the Ohio River dangerous heavy rains that swelled the water beyond its banks and turned the familiar landscape into something alien and threatening. From my bedroom window, I could see the river rising daily, creeping closer to our house with each storm. Alex's behavior during this period became increasingly erratic, as if the approaching culmination of his plan was affecting him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Sometimes, I would catch him watching me with an expression that looked almost like regret, but when I tried to reach out to that flickering humanity, he would retreat behind his mask of cold calculation. "The river's going to crest tonight," he said on the evening of October 23rd, standing in my doorway with a weather report in his hand. "They're predicting the worst flooding in 20 years. There was something in his tone that made my blood run cold, not concern for our safety, but a kind of satisfied anticipation. "We should probably move to higher ground," I said carefully. "Maybe stay with Mrs. Ellis for the night." "Oh, I don't think that will be necessary." His smile was chilling. "Sometimes people with head trauma get disoriented during storms. Sometimes they wander outside, get confused, lose their way. Tragic accidents happen all the time during floods." The words confirmed what I'd been dreading tonight was the night Alex planned to complete his insurance scheme. He was going to stage my accidental drowning during the flood, probably after first ensuring that I was unconscious or otherwise unable to save myself. "Alex, please, you don't have to do this. We can find another way." "There is no other way, Mom. This is the only way it ends." He left the room, and I heard him moving around the house making preparations. I could hear him on the phone, presumably canceling whatever alibis he'd arranged, could hear furniture being moved, could hear the purposeful sounds of someone setting a stage. As night fell and the storm intensified, I realized that this was my last chance to save myself. If I was going to survive, I couldn't wait for rescue. I would have to create my own opportunity. The first step was getting out of my wheelchair. Alex had grown accustomed to thinking of me as helpless, as someone whose mobility was entirely limited by the chair. But months of secret exercise had given me more strength than he realized. I could crawl, could pull myself along the floor, could even raise myself to a standing position for brief periods, using furniture for support. When I heard Alex leaving the house, presumably to establish his alibi for the evening, I began my escape attempt. The plan was simple: get to the kitchen, arm myself with a knife, and barricade myself in a room where I could defend myself until help arrived. But as I pulled myself through the living room, I heard car doors slamming, voices approaching the house. Alex hadn't left to establish an alibi, he'd left to collect his accomplices for one final assault before my accidental death. Jake's voice carried through the storm. "This better work, Alex. If anything goes wrong..." "Nothing will go wrong," Alex replied. "By morning, she'll be found drowned in the flood, and we'll all be very sad about the poor, confused woman who wandered outside during the storm." They were coming back. I had perhaps 60 seconds before they discovered me out of my wheelchair, clearly attempting to escape. In that moment, all the months of terror and helplessness crystallized into pure survival instinct. I dragged myself to the kitchen and pulled a large carving knife from the counter drawer. Then, using every ounce of strength I'd secretly rebuilt, I hauled myself upright and positioned myself behind the door where they would enter. The front door opened, and I could hear them moving through the house, Alex, Jake, and at least 3 others. Their voices were casual, relaxed, as if they were arriving for a social gathering rather than a murder. "Where is she?" Jake asked. "Should be in her bedroom," Alex replied. "Probably sleeping. I gave her some of the strong pain medication earlier." I heard footsteps moving toward my bedroom, heard Alex's voice calling out, "Mom, I brought some friends to see you." Then silence. A long pause as they presumably discovered my empty wheelchair. "Alex, she's not here." "What do you mean, she's not here? She can't go anywhere without the chair?" Rapid footsteps now searching the house. I pressed myself against the wall behind the kitchen door, gripping the knife with both hands, knowing that I would have only one chance to defend myself. "Found her," Jake called from the kitchen doorway. But as he stepped through the door, I brought the knife down with all my strength, catching him in the shoulder. His scream of pain and surprise echoed through the house as he stumbled backward, blood streaming down his arm. "She's got a knife," he shouted. "The crazy bitch stabbed me." The chaos that followed was a blur of violence and desperation. More men poured into the kitchen, but the confined space worked to my advantage. They couldn't all attack at once, and my position behind the door gave me momentary protection. I managed to stab a second attacker, a boy I didn't recognize, in the leg before they overwhelmed me. But the commotion had served a purpose I hadn't expected. The screaming, the crashing of furniture, the sounds of a life-and-death struggle had carried beyond our isolated house. As they dragged me toward the back door, presumably to complete their plan of drowning me in the flooded yard, we heard the sound that changed everything: sirens. "Police!" Alex shouted. "How did they—" "I called them." The voice came from the front door, and I looked up to see the most beautiful sight of my life: Sheriff Tom Riley striding into our living room, followed by 2 deputies and a woman I didn't immediately recognize, but whose voice I would have known anywhere. My sister Maria. Elena. Maria rushed toward me, her face a mask of horror at my condition. "Oh my God, what have they done to you?" Sheriff Riley's gun was drawn, his voice commanding, "Everyone on the ground, now." The would-be killers scattered in different directions, but the deputies were ready for them. Jake, still bleeding from his shoulder wound, was tackled in the living room. The boy I'd stabbed in the leg collapsed near the kitchen table, unable to run. 2 others were caught trying to escape through the back door. Only Alex remained standing, his face a picture of disbelief and rage. This isn't possible," he said, looking at Maria with pure hatred. "You weren't supposed to come back. You weren't supposed to interfere." "I never stopped being her sister," Maria replied firmly. "Even when we weren't speaking, I never stopped caring about her. When she called me, I knew she was telling the truth. Sheriff, you don't understand," Alex said, his voice taking on the smooth, persuasive tone he'd used so successfully before. "My mother is mentally ill. She attacked these boys with a knife. They were just trying to help."
"Save it, Alex." Sheriff Riley cut him off. "Your sister showed me some very interesting things. Medical records, financial documents, a notebook she'd been keeping. We know about the insurance policy. We know about the plan."
It was then that I realized Maria must have done more than just call the police. In the days since our phone conversation, she'd been investigating, gathering evidence, building a case that would support my seemingly impossible story. "She's been documenting everything," Maria explained later as paramedics treated my injuries and the arrested men were loaded into police cars. "Every doctor's visit, every behavior change, every inconsistency in Alex's stories about your condition. When I went to the hospital and talked to Dr. Simmons, when I spoke to your neighbors, when I reviewed the insurance policy, Robert left it all started to make sense. Alex was the last to be arrested, and as Sheriff Riley read him his rights, he looked at me with an expression of pure malevolence. "This isn't over, Mom. You think you've won, but you haven't. You'll never be safe from what I've made you into." But looking at my son, this stranger, who had tortured me for months, I felt something I hadn't experienced in so long. I'd almost forgotten what it was strength. "Yes, I will," I told him quietly. "Because I survived you, Alex, and if I can survive you, I can survive anything." The trial took place the following spring in a courthouse packed with reporters from across Ohio and beyond. The story of a son's systematic torture and attempted murder of his disabled mother had captured national attention, not just for its shocking nature, but for the questions it raised about domestic violence, caregiver abuse, and the vulnerability of disabled women. Alex maintained his innocence throughout, claiming that I was mentally ill and had imagined the entire conspiracy. His defense attorney painted him as a devoted son, driven to desperation by my delusions and violent episodes. But the evidence Maria and the police had gathered was overwhelming. Dr. Simmons testified about the suspicious pattern of injuries I'd sustained over the months, injuries that were inconsistent with accidental falls or self-harm. Mrs. Ellis testified about Alex's strange behavior when she'd tried to visit and about the desperate note I'd tried to show her through the window. Most damaging to Alex's case was the testimony of Eddie Morrison, the nervous 16-year-old who had dropped the incriminating note. Facing serious charges himself, Eddie broke down and confessed everything: the planned insurance fraud, Alex's role as orchestrator, the systematic campaign of psychological and physical torture. "He told us she deserved it." Eddie sobbed on the witness stand. "He said she'd controlled his whole life, that it was time for him to control hers. He said the insurance money was just a bonus. What he really wanted was to watch her break." Jake Harlan, facing charges for multiple assaults, also decided to cooperate with prosecutors. His testimony revealed the full scope of Alex's manipulation, how he'd recruited troubled young men by offering them money, drugs, and the opportunity to hurt someone without consequences. "Alex was the brains," Jake admitted. "He planned everything, told us what to do and when to do it. He said if we got caught, he'd make sure everyone believed his mother was crazy." When it came time for Alex to testify in his own defense, he took the stand with the same cold confidence he'd displayed throughout our ordeal. But under cross-examination, his mask finally began to slip. "Isn't it true that you resented your mother for the sacrifices you had to make after your father's death?" the prosecutor asked. "Everyone resents their parents sometimes. That doesn't make them criminals. But your resentment went deeper than that, didn't it? You blamed her for your father's death." "Ah, she killed him," Alex said suddenly, his composure cracking. "Not directly, but she killed him all the same. Always nagging him to work harder, make more money, provide for us. If she'd been satisfied with what we had, he never would have taken that overtime shift. He never would have been there when that machine." "So you decided to punish her?" "I decided to teach her what it felt like to be powerless. What it felt like to be controlled by someone else. By raping her, by terrorizing her, by planning to murder her, by showing her the truth about what she was: weak, helpless, pathetic.
everything she'd tried to keep me from becoming. The courtroom was silent as Alex's words hung in the air, a confession more complete than any prosecutor could have hoped for. In trying to justify his actions, he'd revealed the depth of his psychopathy, the calculated nature of his cruelty.
The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Alex was found guilty on all charges: conspiracy to commit murder insurance fraud, multiple counts of sexual assault, kidnapping, and terroristic threatening. Judge Harrison sentenced him to life in prison without possibility of parole. Jake Harlan received 15 years for his role in organizing the assaults. Eddie Morrison and the other accomplices received sentences ranging from 8 to 12 years, with opportunities for parole based on their cooperation with prosecutors. As Alex was led away in shackles, he looked back at me one final time. "This isn't how it was supposed to end," he said. "No," I replied. "It's how it was supposed to begin." 10 years have passed since that terrible October night, when my world nearly ended in flood-swollen darkness. 10 years since I discovered what my son truly was and what I was truly capable of when survival demanded it. I write these final words from my office at the River's Edge Foundation, the nonprofit organization Maria and I established 3 years after the trial. Located in Columbus, Ohio, our foundation provides legal assistance, safe housing, counseling services, and advocacy for women whose stories might otherwise go unheard or unbelieved. The foundation is funded in part by Robert's insurance money, the same money Alex tried to steal through murder. There's a bitter irony in using those funds to help other women escape the kind of nightmare he put me through, but it feels like the most appropriate memorial to both Robert's memory and my survival. My physical recovery has been remarkable, though not complete. Physical therapy and determination have given me enough mobility to get around with crutches for short distances, though I still rely on my wheelchair for longer journeys. More importantly, I've learned to see my disability not as a limitation, but as a source of strength, proof that I survived something that should have destroyed me. Maria and I have rebuilt our relationship into something stronger than it ever was before. She lives just a few blocks away from my apartment, and we spend most evenings together planning foundation activities or simply enjoying the quiet companionship of sisters who nearly lost each other forever. "Do you ever regret not having other children?" she asked me recently as we watched the sunset from her back porch. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But then I think about all the women we've helped, all the children we've protected by helping their mothers escape. Maybe this is the family I was meant to have." The foundation has helped over 300 women in its 7 years of operation. Some arrive at our doors with stories similar to mine, family members who have turned against them. Others have fled abusive spouses, controlling boyfriends, or simply found themselves trapped in situations where no one believed their accounts of the violence they'd endured. We don't just provide shelter and legal assistance. We work to change the systems that failed women like me, training police officers to recognize signs of caregiver abuse, educating medical professionals about the unique vulnerabilities of disabled women, lobbying for stronger laws protecting victims of domestic violence. Our most successful program is what we call Survivor Voices, a speakers bureau where women who have escaped abusive situations share their stories with community groups, law enforcement agencies, and medical professionals. I speak regularly at these events, and while it's always difficult to relive my ordeal, I've found that sharing my story helps both me and my audiences understand that survival is possible even in the darkest circumstances. Alex continues to write to me from prison. His letters arrive monthly, postmarked from the state penitentiary where he's serving his life sentence. I stopped reading them years ago. My therapist and I agreed that maintaining contact with him served no purpose except to give him continued power to hurt me. But I know from the warden, who occasionally calls to check on my welfare, that Alex shows no signs of remorse or rehabilitation. He maintains his innocence, claims he's the victim of a conspiracy between me and the justice system, and has filed numerous unsuccessful appeals. "He talks about you constantly," the warden told me during his last call. "Not with anger anymore, but with a kind of obsession. He seems to believe that if he can just explain his actions correctly, you'll understand and forgive him.
There's nothing to understand and nothing to forgive, I replied. He made his choices, and now he's living with the consequences.
Last month, Maria and I drove back to Milford for the dedication of a new domestic violence shelter built on the site where my old house once stood. The house where I was tortured, where I nearly died, had been torn down years ago, but the land had remained empty until the county decided to build something positive from that negative space. Standing in the parking lot of the new shelter, surrounded by social workers, police officers, and other survivors, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't expected. The place where my nightmare began had been transformed into a sanctuary for other women facing their own dark nights of the soul. "Your mother would be proud," Maria said as we watched the ribbon-cutting ceremony. "Which mother?" I asked, thinking of Anna, my immigrant mother, who had taught me to take care of others and of myself, the woman who had learned to take care of herself when no one else would. "Both of them," Maria replied. As I finish writing this memoir, I'm aware that some readers will want a different ending, one where Alex experiences a redemption arc, where family love conquers all, where forgiveness leads to healing for everyone involved. But this is not that kind of story. Some people cannot be saved, cannot be reached, cannot be loved back to humanity once they've chosen to abandon it. Alex made his choice when he decided that his pain justified inflicting greater pain on someone who had loved him unconditionally. The boy I raised may have suffered, may have felt controlled or misunderstood, but the man he became chose to respond to that suffering by becoming a monster. My healing didn't come from forgiving him. It came from accepting that he was responsible for his choices, and I was responsible for mine. I chose to survive. I chose to rebuild. I chose to transform my pain into purpose. This is how we win against evil, not through revenge or hatred, but through the stubborn insistence that goodness can emerge from even the deepest wounds. We win by refusing to let our victimization define us, by building something beautiful from the rubble of our destroyed lives, by reaching out to help others who are still trapped in the darkness we've escaped. I am Elena Thompson, and I survived. More than that, I thrived. And in sharing my story, I hope to light a path for other women who may be reading these words from their own locked rooms, their own wheelchairs, their own seemingly impossible situations. You are stronger than you know. You are worth saving. And sometimes, if you hold on long enough, if you fight hard enough, if you refuse to surrender your essential self to those who would destroy it, you discover that the person you've been waiting to save you has been there all along. It was you. It was always you. Elena Thompson is the founder and director of the River's Edge Foundation, which provides services to survivors of domestic violence and caregiver abuse. She lives in Columbus, Ohio, with her sister Maria and continues to advocate for policy changes that protect vulnerable women throughout the state.